referee if you want. I'm sure that as we go through some of the tournaments, you'll have some much less nice names to call the referees, but we kind of expect that. You know, we hope that you'll be gracious professionals.
I remember seeing you at the Summer Cup.
At the Summer Cup last week?
Yeah.
Yes. So I didn't want to be the head referee. I don't like being head referee when my team's competing. My team doesn't like me being head referee when they're competing because I call extra hard on them. So they can't get away with anything that they can get away with other referees. And so on. So for today, again, this was an open session. I don't have a presentation. I don't have anything specific prepared to present, but this is a chance for all of you to hear what it's like to be a referee and what to know as far as being a referee. Before I start, how many rookies do we have in here? Okay, so this is your first season in FTC. So if you didn't raise your hand, you've done FTC before, right? Okay, cool. So let me just open it up. Does anybody have any burning questions you've always wanted to ask about rules or FTC or anything like that? Wow, okay, I got two already. Let me go over here.
So what is, I'm kind of like a brand new to the robot competition. So what is the goal for the competition? Like how do you tell that who is winning, who is losing?
So it changes every year. So on the day of the kickoff, Game Manual Part 2 will come out. So if you were in the earlier afternoon session, Mr. Cherryholm said that Game Manual Part 1 is out and it describes the competition as a whole. But as far as what the specifics are for this coming season's game, none of us know. Even I don't know yet. And that will be released on September 10th. So part of the challenge then will be to go through and read the Game Manual Part 2, and it will tell you how many points all the activities are worth. So for example, in this last year's game, you would get points for scoring freight, the blocks and the balls onto the hubs, or you would get points for being able to park in a certain location at certain times in the match. So once we get that game description out in September, then we'll know what the rules are, and then we'll know how many points people can get and so forth. In terms of how the competition itself is structured, you're going to have a 12-foot by 12-foot field. There'll be 2 robots chosen at random that will be on the red side. There'll be 2 other robots chosen at random on the blue side. And what happens is the red side wants to score more points than the blue side, and the blue side wants to score more points than the red side. And whichever side gets more points, those robots get a win. And then you go through the day calculating how many wins and losses you have. Once you get to the end of what are called the qualification matches, then the top teams become the captains and they go into a alliance selection and a playoff. So you'll see lots more examples of that throughout the season, and I also highly recommend going to a scrimmage so that you can find out what it's like early in the season and see what a competition's like, see what all the game rules are, and learn all the mistakes before any of the matches count. So I hope I answered your question. Yes?
So I'm from a rookie team, like this is our first year in an FTC. The people who get really far in FTC, like get really far in the competition, their strategies for the robot game, are they similar to the average team, or based on your experience? Okay.
So I also coach a team, 71-72. We made it to the World Championship last year. We start our season planning for what does our robot need to do at the World Championship. That's where we start. Is we asked ourselves, what do we expect the teams in the playoffs to be doing in the World Championship? That's what we need to be doing, at least as good as that. Now, we don't try to get there immediately, right? We also know we have 7 months to get to that point, right? But we're always asking ourselves and using that as the standard in order to do it. Most teams, that are new or that haven't done that or that don't get very far, they don't think about it in terms of that. Most of them are thinking, wow, can I at least get my robot to work? And that's a reasonable thing to do, especially in a first season. And so on. But in terms of strategy, it takes a little bit of experience to go through and read the rules and then be able to figure out where all the points are, right? And that's where my team always starts. Is we start with the rules and we say, okay, let's pretend we're the top team in the world, right? How many points do we think we're going to score in the autonomous period? How many points and where will we do it? How many points will our partners be able to score? And we try and figure that out using the rules, and then we say that's what we need to be targeting for the whole season. Yes?
Has it always been 2 people on each team, or
Yes.
was there ever like 1 person?
It's always been 2 versus 2 robots.
Okay.
At least as far as I've been doing this, which is now, this is my 11th year, so doing it. Right here, and then I'll come back to you again.
So the according to Game Manual 1, there's 2 drivers and a human.
There's 2, this year there'll be 2 drivers, a coach, and a human player.
Oh, 4, so that's 4.
There will be 4, but only 1 human player for Alliance.
So, what was confusing me was, what does it mean that you're a human player and coach, and do they all have to be students?
The coach can be an adult, but most top teams use student coaches.
Okay.
All right. So the coach is not the coach of like the team. The coach is intended to be the coach of the drive team.
Mm-hmm.
So traditionally in First Tech Challenge, you'll have 2 drivers, right? You have 2 people who are able to use the game pads to control the robot. Then they're allowed another person called a coach, and the role of the coach differs from team to team, but what a lot of teams do is the coach is watching the whole field, because when the drivers are driving, they're watching their robot, right? They're really focused on what is their robot doing, but they often need to know what is their partner doing, or what is the other team's robots doing, and it's really hard for them to focus on their robot and do that, and so that's what the coach can do. So for example, the coach player on my team this last year, he's watching the clock. And he's also watching what's happening with the other robots. But he's basically telling the drivers, okay, there's 45 seconds left, right? There's 40 seconds left. There's this much time left. Or he'll be saying, you know, you can go find parts that you need over here. Go to the other side of the field, do that. So he's kind of giving them guidance about where to go next. For the upcoming, so that's 2 drivers and then a coach. And then in this season coming up, there'll be a human player. And the human player is, there's 1 per alliance. So it comes from one of the 2 teams, and you decide with your partner alliance team which human player you want to use. And usually they have some sort of interaction with the field, like they'll be putting elements onto the field. So the last, in Ultimate Goal, the human player stood behind the goals, and after you shot a ring, they were responsible for feeding it back onto the field. In Skystone, you had a big stash of game elements that you could put onto the field one at a time, and the human player was the person who would reload the field with another game element whenever it got played. So the strategy about how you want to do that is very team specific. At most events, if you want to maximize your wins, then you often pick your 2 best drivers and they drive every match, right? Because you really don't want to necessarily lose a match. I had another question back there.
I think I forgot.
Oh no, I hate when that happens.
I'll like read that.
So yes.
So my question, I'm new here too. When I observed the summer camp, I just realized that the alliance 2 teams, they need to coordinate really, really well so that they don't, block the way to pick up the items, right? So what's the best strategy to talk to them before they don't know their partner, who their partner is?
So you'll know at the beginning of the day, before any of the matches start, you get a match schedule for all the matches that'll be played that day. Mm-hmm. And on that match schedule, it'll tell you who your partners are. So as soon as you get that match schedule, you go find that other team and you say, well, our robot does this. What does your robot do? And they'll tell you what theirs does. And then you figure out between your 2 robots what the 2 of you can do to work together to maximize your score. So you don't know the day before you get there, but you do know the day of, before any matches are played, who your partners are going to be, and you can figure out your strategy before you get to the field. I will say, as a head referee, one of the things that frustrates referees is when teams get to the field and that's the first time they've talked to each other, and they choose that, there it is, right? And they choose that moment to decide how they're going to play the game. That frustrates the heck out of us, because now we're waiting on you. right? When we're having a competition, there are a lot of matches, we're trying to get through them, and if things slow down, if you take an extra 30 seconds to a minute to get your teams ready to play the match, then pretty soon the day gets longer for everybody. And for those of us who have been at competitions that have lasted until 8 o'clock at night, you know, those kind of things are really frustrating. So I really do suggest that once you get your match schedule, have somebody on your team go talk to the other team members, get your drive team members together, and, you know, figure out what it is that you're going to do before you get to the field. One of the things that my team talked about this morning when they were talking about their World Championship experience is as soon as they got the match schedule, they went and contacted every other team that we were going to be partnered with and said, when can we meet you on the practice field? And they ran practice matches together on the practice field so that they could see whatever each other's robot could do, and they could make sure exactly what you said, that they weren't going to run into each other, that they were going to be able to work around each other, that they knew that if this went wrong, this is how they were going to handle it, those kind of things. Yes?
So I noticed in a lot of the videos that like other teams during the first before lunch, they were talking about like another robot from the other team wasn't exactly like attacking their robot, but it was like stopping them from doing function. What are the like rules to like sabotage or like?
So we call that defense. Okay, we call that defense. So defense is legal in First Tech Challenge, and the Game Design Committee, this is the group that puts together the game every year, they try to make defense as hard as possible. So almost every season, every game, if you decide I'm gonna go try and stop another team from scoring, the game has a ton of penalties waiting for you if you mess up. So there are things like, in some years, like let's say there's a robot and they're just getting ready to score and you bump into them, right? Some years that's a penalty. Some years it's not, but you have to know that, right? So that if you're gonna try and block them, then you have to know, I can't block them just as they're about to score, or else I'm gonna get a penalty, and that means their score is gonna go even higher. By the way, that's different for this year from the past couple of years, that penalties will increase your opponent's score. In previous years, it decreased your own, but this year it makes your opponent's score. And usually the penalties are designed so that the score goes up for the other side by more than if you had let them do whatever it was they wanted to do anyway, right? So, you know, if they were about to score 6 points and you bump into them and they don't score, then they get 30 instead, right? So things like that will happen.
Is there an intentional versus non-intentional?
It's really hard for referees to determine intent, right? It's
But
really
do you-
hard for,
do you have that?
sometimes it's there, right? And so sometimes we do have to make a call about was something intentional or non-intentional. And almost always our guidance is to assume it was intentional, right? Because otherwise the team will say, well, I didn't really mean to do that, right? So that's often not a good excuse. So if you decide to do defense, the one main, there are lots of penalties that try and keep you from doing things that will cause the game to stop, because nobody likes to see a game where nobody scores. And so the offense always gets favored over defense in those particular types of situations. Yeah?
So also about that, if any damage is caused to an opponent's robot, like what will happen to your,
So
caused by you? Like,
it is. So this is a great one that goes with the other question, right? So it is expected that robots can run into each other. You're not allowed to ram somebody else's robot. That is a judgment call based on the referee, right? So the referee says, oh no, they were just both going to the same spot and they happen to run into each other or they happen to hit each other, that's okay. If one robot is sitting there saying, I'm gonna stop the other one, and they're pounding into them really fast, you're gonna get a penalty very, very quickly for that. And so there it's going to look at. If a robot gets damaged on the field, we're sorry, but you know, that's not usually a penalty associated with that. And that again, you know, we have to look and say, do we think that they were trying to cause damage? If so, we'll give a penalty. But the one that usually happens for us as referees is you'll have a team and they built a robot and they've got a part that's hanging out and it's connected by like 2 screws, right? It's just connected by 2 screws and it's kind of hanging on or whatever, and another robot kind of bumps it and the part falls off and they're like, penalty, they broke our robot. And it's like, no, you kind of built a robot designed to break. So we're not gonna, just because a robot gets damaged doesn't mean there's a penalty. Does anybody else have any questions? Because I don't want to like always go to the same one. Okay, cool.
Mine was just continuation of last one. But if it was jammed because of another opponent, does the match pause and like fix it? Or?
No. Once a match begins, it goes. Right? So we say 3, 2, 1, go. There's a 30-second autonomous period. During that 30 seconds, the robots are on your own. The one thing I will tell all the rookie teams, the rookie drivers, do not touch your controllers until you hear the buzzer, right? That ends the autonomous period. Only when that buzzer sounds can you touch the controllers. You can't touch your robot in the middle. We don't stop for anything. When the autonomous period's over, then the scoring system will say, drivers, pick up your controllers. 3, 2, 1, go. As soon as they say drivers, pick up your controllers, you can get your controllers ready, you can get ready. When they say 3, 2, 1, go, you can start driving and we go to the end of the match. If a robot breaks down, we just let the match continue. If something goes drastically wrong on the field, we let the match continue. If it's a safety issue, we'll stop the match. But if it's not a safety issue, we just keep going. Yes? No, you.
So what happens if the robot crashes during the autonomous period?
You hope that it crashes well. So like, for example, my team builds detection things into their autonomous program. So the robot detects if anything seems to have gone wrong. And if it thinks anything has gone wrong, it just stops. It just completely stops. Because what you don't want to have happen is for it to go randomly on the other side of the field and start getting lots of penalties. Because, you'll just lose the match that way. So, if something goes wrong in the autonomous, we just wait and see where everything ends up, and we score it the way that it is there. Yes, in back.
Has there been like a time when one partner didn't show up to the match?
Is there a time when one partner doesn't show up to a match? Yes. Then whatever robot does show up, they just play one robot. So, and we don't, there's no timeouts. There's no, like, oh, we just need 5 more minutes or anything like that. When it's time for the match, we put the robots on the field and we start the match. And yeah, that does mean sometimes your partners aren't ready. Sometimes your partner's robot really broke a lot in the previous match and they haven't fixed it for the next one, and you just end up having to play the match by yourself. The top teams all know to expect. You may get a match where you're partnered with a robot that can't do very well, and you just have to do the best you can. So you just plan for that at the beginning.
And send a person.
Oh yeah, but definitely, even if your robot's not ready, you always send a driver. Because if you have somebody standing in the driver's station, right, even if you don't have a robot, and your team wins the match, you still get credit for the win, even if your robot wasn't on the field, right? Whereas if you don't have anybody in the box, don't have anybody standing there as your driver, then you're technically disqualified from the match and you don't get credit for the win. If your partner robot is the only robot on the field and they lose, it's the same thing as if you weren't there. So you might as well be there just in case they tie or win. Yes?
Is there a way to get disqualified from the whole tournament?
Yeah, but don't do it. So there are, and they're in the game manuals. Typically they're in game manual part 1. So if you do any sort of behavior that would not be gracious professionalism. So if you're making threats to other teams, if you're bribing teams, if you're, there's a variety of things that are so egregious that we can say we are rejecting you from the entire tournament. I've only ever had that happen once, and it wasn't a team member, it was a coach. All right, and it's not pretty because we actually, nowadays, we're supposed to call first headquarters and get it cleared through them and explain to them what's been happening, and it really slows things down. So just go and be nice. But the other thing that can get you ejected from a tournament is if you set up a hotspot at the tournament. And the reason for that is because if you set up a hotspot, you might be interfering with the robots on the field. So that is another thing that you might think is kind of innocuous, right? But if you set up a hotspot on your phone or something like that, then that is grounds for you to be dismissed from the tournament, your whole team. So
Even there's stay away from the field? How far away do you measure?
not anywhere in the competition area or in the pits.
Oh, okay.
Or in the pits. So whenever I've had to do that, I leave the building. I set up my hotspot, do whatever I need to do, turn it off, and then come back in.
Okay.
Right, but yeah, it's just because the worst thing to have happen is that somebody's running a hotspot and it causes a robot on the field on another team to not be able to play well. That's like really bad, and it's really hard to track down. So they just say no hotspots at the event. Yeah.
So, the game changes every year. So are there any things that will never be on the game? Will never be like a part of the game? That
I have no idea. Yeah, you say that. You say that. You know, in FRC, not FTC, in FRC, one year they needed to come up with another game idea, so they assigned it to this person, and he didn't really want to do it. And they already had like several game ideas. And he said, what's the one thing I could do that they would never do in an FRC game? And he said, let's put players in the middle of the field during the match. Right? Like, and these FRC robots are big. They move at 30 miles an hour. They can hurt you. They can kill you. They're big, right? So let's put people on the field in the middle of the match. And that's the game they chose that year. Right? So now they put the people in the middle of the field up on a platform and, you know, where they dealt with safety, but they actually had players in the middle of the field interacting with the robots during the game. So I'm really reluctant to say there's not anything.
I will say one thing I know they won't do.
Yeah.
There will never be a BattleBot-like game.
Right.
Yes, correct. They won't have one where destruction is the point of the game. That's for sure. Yes?
How are the leagues teams chosen? Is there a logic to it, or?
So that's a long question, but I'll tell you my interpretation of it, which is what will happen is pretty much the same way we used to do qualifiers, which is at some point we will say leagues are now open for sign up. And then you will go and you'll pick your 3 choices for what league you want to be in. And then you will get your highest choice if it's available, and if it's not available, we'll go to your second choice, right? It'll open for everybody at the same time, so that you know, everybody has an equal chance to get in all the different leagues, and all of the information about the leagues, like when they compete, what format they're going to be using, if it's 5 or 6 matches, when they expect to be playing, all of that will be known for teams, because different teams have different criteria. So some teams want to definitely be in a league that's nearby where they live. My team cares most about the calendar. We care most about when are the competition dates, because my team members are very busy with lots of other activities, and we want to make sure we choose dates when they can be there. So it's lots of different things. Yes?
I think there's only time for one more question.
Okay. Well, actually, I want to, rather than take a question then, I want to just talk about one other thing that I think every team should know that deals with referees, and that's about the question box.
Yes.
All right? So during a match, when you're playing and whatever, you may disagree with the calls that a referee has made, or you may think that they're calling it wrong and so forth. And so at every event, there's a special box called the question box, and it's somewhere near the game fields. And what you're allowed to do is to send one student representative, and it has to be a student, to that box to ask a question to the referee. And that question can be something like, I don't think, you know, you scored this match correctly, or I don't think such and such happened correctly, or are you sure this rule is correctly? The one thing that I will give you 2 hints about doing the question box that really help you in terms of being able to get what you want out of it. So first of all is don't run to the question box immediately after the match. So my team members do this a lot, where something happens in a match and they immediately send somebody to the question box without discussing it among any of the other team members to say what it is they're going to ask, right? And then they get up there and they talk to the referee, and they don't have the rule at the top of their head. They're just certain something went wrong, and so they ask the question and the referee gives them an answer, and then they come back and they tell me about it, and I'm like, why did you run to the question box without coming and checking with the team first, right? So being fast doesn't help you. You have 3 matches in order to get to the question box, and being there 10 seconds after the match versus a match later isn't going to be a huge help. So take some time, if you think that something went wrong in a match, to know exactly what you're going to ask the head referee when you get there. And the second thing is, if you think the rule was called incorrectly, bring a copy of the rule with you, right? So when my team members, my team member who goes to the question box, she's actually quite well known among the referees because she always comes prepared. Except she didn't do it once at MTI and we didn't get the call to go our way. But if you bring a copy of the rule and you can say, this rule says it's supposed to be this way and I think the referees called it wrong, referees like that. You might think they wouldn't like that, but referees really like it when team members show up at the question box and they know why they're saying what it is that they're saying. They've read the rule, they understand the rule and so forth. Then you can have a really good conversation. So before you go to the question box, don't just rush there and say, I think you were wrong in this thing. Have the rule, have whatever it is that you need to do that, and have somebody who understands how to go to the question box and to do all of that stuff. All right? All right. So I think that's the last thing. Thank you all.